Hey everyone, welcome to the EthStaker community call. This is number 59, and I'm Jonathan from EthStaker, and we have a number of people here from the community. We're going to talk today about a couple of new EIPs that are in consideration or coming for one of the next hard forks for Ethereum. So yeah, we're going to be talking about ePBS and FOCIL today, and we're really excited to welcome several guests here, core developers working on the protocol. We have POTUS from Off-Chain Labs, we have Terrence from Off-Chain Labs, and we have Jihoon Song. And so you guys, I'll let you introduce yourselves, but I just want to frame this up a little bit before we get started. The reason why this call became of interest and came about is because over the last several weeks, these two EIPs got a lot more serious for inclusion, I would say. They're in different statuses right now, and I think we want to understand what that means for what's definitely coming in, what's still being considered, and whatnot. But both of these EIPs impact the staking ecosystem and what life looks like for a staker on Ethereum. So we want to help educate about that and have some Q&A. So if you are in the YouTube chat, thank you for being there. We're excited to see what questions you have as well. So for the next hour or so, let's dive into it. I'll also note that this call, so if a little, we'll add some references, but a little over a year ago, we did a community call just about ePBS in May of 2024. And that one was a little bit more like, hey, this is a new idea. There's different ways of doing this being tested. Now this is all a lot more like, okay, well, ePBS is definitely coming. And FOCIL is much more, something we can be expecting as well at some point, I think. So it's a lot more operational now. Like we're like, okay, what does this mean? Let's learn like what it looks like now over a year later. So yeah, so let's set the stage there. POTUS and Terrence and Jihoon, thank you three for joining. Can you maybe just start by introducing yourselves and what you're focused on? And then we can get into what these EIPs are all about. How about we start with POTUS, if that works? Just a quick hello and intro.
POTUS, you might be on mute.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, so I'm not sure how my microphone is going to work on this call for the next like 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to be just quick. I work for Prism, which is part of Off-Chain Labs. And I've been focusing my work on the last 2 or more years now on trying to ship ePBS. And we're very happy that it's been scheduled for inclusion next year in the Glamsterdam fork. I'll leave it short at that.
Perfect. Yeah, and we could hear you great there. Terrence, how about just quick intro as well?
Same with POTUS, short and sweet. I'm from Off-Chain Labs. I'm working on Prism for a while now. And yeah, I'm mainly focused on ePBS and super excited to be here.
Cool. Thanks, and Jihoon.
Hello, I'm Jihoon. Thanks for having me here. I'm working on FOCIL. I've been working on anything related to FOCIL implementation, consensus and execution specs, Prism and CAD prototypes, local devnets, you name it.
Also curious about what changes they've gone through over maybe since someone may have heard about it like a year or more ago. Before we do that, I'll also say we'll provide links to these. There's really great resources on this forkcast.org website for anyone looking to dive in more after things you hear today. So, all the EIPs under consideration have overviews there, which are great. But yeah, how about we start with just a quick like overview of ePBS, and then we can do FOCIL, and then get more deep into these things and what we should expect for stakers with them. POTUS, do you want to do with ePBS? What's happening? What's changing here for us?
Sure. Just making sure that I am being listened to.
Yes.
I'm not gonna be safe about my phone for a while. All right. So ePBS, in short, what it does is I mean, there's one thing which is the description and the title of the IP, and the other thing which is the biggest impact for Ethereum. So the biggest impact for Ethereum on this EIP would be the pipelining difference on the slot. So what ePBS does, it moves out of the hot path of block validation, essentially everything. It makes it so that in a very short amount of time, you need to propagate the consensus block and vote for it and attest for it, but this is a small amount of data that is being propagated on the network, and then you have the entirety of the remainder of the slot to execute transactions, to validate the execution of the block, and to propagate blobs. So in short, the biggest impact of the CIP would be to allowing either lower hardware for validators, for stakers, and for full nodes, or with the same hardware that we have today and the same bandwidth that we have today, multiply by 4 or more the number of blobs that you can propagate and make it so that you can propagate much larger blocks with many more transactions. The mechanism by which the CIP achieves that also at the same time changes the staking, the mechanism by which stakers connect with builders to build those blocks. So today, stakers rely on a trusted intermediary, which is the relay, and the relay essentially disappears on ePBS, allowing the proposers that want to do so to directly connect to the builders in a trustless manner. To do this, the builders become staked in protocol, just validators, essentially like the compounding validator of Electra. Builders will have to be staked, and they're going to be paying their bids with their staked money. I hope that was good enough.
Yeah, I think that's a great overview. Definitely some re-architecting, right, of like what we're used to seeing there. And it's so you mentioned that the hardware requirements would go down. I mean, this is a hot topic for everyone. You know, people are wanting to keep the hardware requirements not increasing. I think there's like interest in that across the board, and also bandwidth. Like, so you're saying this helps with hardware and bandwidth. Is that a fair?
Yes, correct. So on the bandwidth side, it's because currently you have about 2 seconds to propagate all blobs. And in ePBS, you're going to have about 10 seconds to propagate all blobs. So of course, if you multiply the number of blobs by 5, it's going to be the same bandwidth requirement. But if you just multiply it by 2, even multiplying the number of blobs by 2, you still have twice the bandwidth that you have today. As for hardware, well, today, a slow CPU might not be able to execute a full execution block in those 2 seconds that we have today. But if you have now 8 seconds as in ePBS, then that same old CPU can actually execute it. On the other hand, I mean, this is a political decision. It's not up to me. But it's more likely that what we're going to see is keeping the hardware requirement as they are today, but increasing the size of the blocks, rather than reducing the hardware requirements.
Okay. So this EIP is scheduled for inclusion, meaning that it's definitely in Glamsterdam. So this is, yeah, definitely something for stakers listening to be learning about. I'm glad to have you with that overview. I appreciate that, and the Q&A we'll be doing. Maybe we can get a quick overview of what FOCIL is, and as we think about these together, like, how do they, I guess one question I have is, how do they impact each other, if there is an impact? And FOCIL is, my understanding, considered. It's in this considered for inclusion stage, where it's not, you know, fully like confirmed and scheduled in to the Glamsterdam hard fork. So June, do you want to give us an overview of what it is, and then maybe we can have a little bit of discussion about how these may interact, or just kind of help clarify that for us a little bit too. But start with the overview, I guess.
Yes, I'm happy to share the overview of FOCIL. So FOCIL introduces a mechanism that allows multiple testers to constrain next slot builders to include certain set of transactions. We borrow 16 Beacon committee members per slot to form the inclusion list committee. each inclusion list committee member produces inclusion list, which is a set of transactions. They collect transactions from their public mempool, and builders should include those transactions in their payload. Testers validate if a payload satisfies the inclusion list constraints and attest to it only if it is compliant. So if a payload is inclusion list incompliant, it will get reorged and not become a part of the canonical chain.
Okay. Got it. So I guess, what is it that stakers like how does this impact anything about like what would be required of stakers or like different roles they would play? That's a question that came up in my mind is like, you think about today, you're talking about this new like inclusion committee. I forget what you called it exactly.
Yes.
Okay. So is that kind of like along the lines of like a sync committee in terms of like a particular role of a validator could be taking at any moment, or how do we think about that? Like, am I on the right track there, or is that kind of not quite?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's a new committee, yet another new committee that we would like to add with this to include this mechanism. So if you are a tester, then if you are a part of a beacon committee, then we select 16 beacon committee members per each slot to convene as an inclusion list committee member. So if you are part of inclusion list committee member, then you are supposed to serve the duty, which is producing inclusion list. And the inclusion list will be consumed by testers and other validators, including builders, to produce a payload which is inclusion list compliant.
Okay. And so does this, maybe we can get into like if and how these interact at all. Like if this is included in Glamsterdam, what does it require for working alongside ePBS? Like, or are these independent? Like how do these interact, if at all? I'm just curious on that standpoint. I mean, that's a
Yes.
question for both of you, maybe.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the most important question for this call. Maybe I can start with what's the impact of FOCIL for stakers.
Yeah.
I think it has two prongs. One is bandwidth, and the other is resource consumption. An inclusion list can take up to 8 kibibytes. There are 16 inclusion list committee members per slot, so theoretically, the union of 16 inclusion lists can be 128 kibibytes at maximum. This is half of a blob size, which is known to be digestible. The other point would be you want to have a good peer connection to have your mempool stay up to date. This helps you to produce healthier or fresher inclusion list, but FOSSIL doesn't have an incentive mechanism, so you won't be incentivized nor penalized depending on your inclusion list content. So it's nice to have. So I think we can say that the bandwidth burden is quite low. When it comes to resource consumption, I think it also has two prongs. When you construct your inclusion list, you collect transactions from your public mempool. You don't need to execute them, you just need to make a list of it. And for the inclusion list enforcement, you iterate the inclusion list transactions that are not present in a payload and check its intrinsic validity, if there was enough gas left to include that transaction, if nonce was correct, and if the sender could have afforded the transaction. So you can validate it without extra transaction execution. So we can also say that it's not a resource heavy task. I think that would be the impact of FOSSIL for stakers. For the interaction between FOSSIL and ePBS, the inclusion list enforcement is split into two steps. Two steps because of the separation of beacon block and execution payload. When a testers receive a payload, they check if it's inclusion list compliant. So if it's compliant, we're good. If it's not, the upcoming beacon block should extend the parent of the payload. In other words, it should reorg that inclusion list incompliant payload. So if you are so if you are the if you propose the beacon block for slot n, and let's say if the payload for slot n-1 was inclusion list incompliant, then the beacon block for slot n should extend, let's say, the payload for slot n-2 instead of n-1. That's the gist of it. ePBS separates, payload from beacon block, and this gives us nice synergy, which is the beacon chain can keep making progress even when a payload doesn't comply with the inclusion list.
Okay. So, yeah, and I think one question I had is like, does any of this create like new slashing conditions at all? Like if there's new responsibilities for a node operator, a staking node operator in this, like with FOCIL, especially with having like an inclusion list that's kind of like forced to be done by the protocol, like does it create any additional risks or slashing situations that we should be aware of? Or
If you are when you are on a tester, then or an inclusion list committee member, then you don't need to worry about any slashing or any kind of risk because we don't have an incentive mechanism. So it's unfair to penalize for not performing your duty. So, but if you as a staker, if you wanna locally build your payload, then I think you need to have a good internet connection to collect all the inclusion list proposed for that slot to produce inclusion list compliant payload. Otherwise, your block will get reorged and you won't be able to get any reward.
okay. So with this one, like what can with FOCIL still being in this considered status, what is needed if stakers are behind this and want to help advocate or signal a preference for it? Like what would be helpful if anything in the current stage of the process? And I think
Yes,
that's really about FOCIL because ePBS is already scheduled. So yeah.
yeah, that's a really good question. So I believe we saw strong support for FOCIL from the community, which helped a lot to CFI FOCIL for Amsterdam. I think the biggest constraint for now would be the timeline for Amsterdam. So like how long does it gonna take to implement FOCIL? No, how long does it gonna take to implement ePBS, and then how long does it gonna implement FOCIL on top of it? And do we want to take that added complexity, given that we wanna ship 2 forks a year? Good news is ePBS folks recently agreed to aim for the first DevNet by the end of October. So I expect we can have a clearer vision by the end of this year.
Okay. So it's like through that DevNetting process, that would clarify like how and if FOCIL could be included. So it's like the consensus of interest is there. It's just more about timing and like capability within the timeline. Is that a fair description?
Yes, I think it's I think you can say that. So yeah, it's kind of like a general consensus is that FOCIL is good, although it's not a silver bullet for censorship resistance. I believe many people think that it's a good first step to provide censorship resistance across the stack from the protocol layer to users via application layer. But the biggest constraint is, as we discussed earlier, is how long is going to add the timeline for Glamsterdam.
On that timing concept, there's an ETH Magicians post that kind of talks about like some of the motivation and reasons for FOCIL and this idea that, you know, we're trying to like get ahead of maybe censorship behavior that could emerge. And I guess I'm just trying to understand like what is it that we're trying to get ahead of? Like at what point is it more difficult to come back from it? Like is there like what's the urgency of having this in a Glamsterdam fork versus, you know, a follow-on one or
Yeah, I think it's another important question. So we saw that the major two top builders censored transactions around half a year ago, and suddenly they stopped censoring for some, I don't know, whatever reason. So we currently see no or very little censorship, but that's thanks to the altruism of relayers or builders. And I think one of the biggest potential benefits of FOCIL would be enhance the credible neutrality of the network. One inclusion list is enough to cover all pending transactions in the public mempool. You can construct your inclusion list however you want. You can put some transaction from your private order flow or whatnot, but as long as there is at least one honest inclusion list committee member, we can provide the equality of opportunity for all transactions. And if we don't ship FOCIL in Glamsterdam, then you might argue that you can ship FOCIL in H fork, but we have 3 goals, as you know, a scale L1, scale L2, and improve UX. According to these 3 goals in our minds, it is highly likely that we want to ship 6-second slots for H star fork. And then I don't think we want to ship FOCIL along with slot reduction because it brings so many unknowns and it has a moving target more than we want. So if we don't ship FOCIL in Glamsterdam, I'm pretty sure that it won't be shipped in next 2 to 3 years at the earliest. So that's why we think we want to ship FOCIL in Glamsterdam.
okay. I think we were talking before this, like what do we think that likelihood is? I mean, is there anything like how, you know, you talk about how it's kind of like dependent on how everything goes through the next couple of weeks and months with testing. Do you have a sense of that? Like, is this, you know, are there like likelihoods that we can give on this or you know, ePBS is in, right? We know that. With FOCIL, like at what point do you guys have any sense of that, or does everyone have like a different opinion on how likely we will see FOCIL here in Glamsterdam? And also, I guess I'm curious, like how much it impacts ePBS, like, you know, the work for testing and implementation of that. I'm interested from that angle. Yeah, go ahead, POTUS.
So in principle, FOCIL does not affect the implementation of ePBS at all. I mean, this Yehun himself like rebased FOCIL on top of ePBS, and the people that are working on them are for the most independent. Terence, I think, is the only one that is working on both sides. Now, regarding inclusion or not of FOCIL in Glamsterdam, I honestly think that it's a little premature to even guess these things because there's always this problem of when you're scoping a fork, what do you do first? Do you scope with a timeline, with a target timeline, or do you scope first with the content and then you decide the timeline as a function of the content of the fork? And ACD has not made such a decision yet. So there are some numbers being thrown around for timelines, but these numbers are the personal opinion of people and not something that ACD has decided. We haven't even decided whether or not we want to scope with a timeline in mind or with a scope in mind yet. So once that decision is made, we're going to have a much clearer decision, much clearer path for FOCIL or even for ePBS itself. I mean, if we decide that what I know for a fact is, if we decide that Glamsterdam is targeted for February 2026, then not even ePBS is going to be there. And then we might have block level access list and just a pure EL fork. If we decide to put the timeline a little bit later, then ePBS gets in. And if we put it much later, well, not much later, I'm sorry, a little bit later than after ePBS, then FOCIL might get in as well. But it's important that if we go that path of first deciding the timeline and then deciding the scope, well, once we set a timeline, we're going to know, we're going to have an idea of the likelihood of FOCIL. If we do it the other way around, it's much easier. If we do decide we want to have FOCIL and ePBS on the same fork, then we're going to set the timeline accordingly once we know how long it's going to take. I personally think that it's much likelier that it's going to happen that ACD will decide on scoping with a time and then setting sort of like a deadline by which we should have knowledge whether or not FOCIL is feasible by that deadline or not. But it's just too early to know because we don't really have a timeline yet.
Okay. That's helpful. Okay. I think we've gotten covered most of the like kind of shape of this conversation and what each of these are and how they interrelate with each other. But maybe we can get into some of the other questions about how it impacts like quality of life or just operationally for stakers, and any other questions we have a Q&A. If there are any in the YouTube chat, we can also take those.
Can we actually ask the question that Forsten asked in the chat?
Yes, I saw that one. Let's go back there. So, Buddha, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So the idea is that, so if I understood correctly, Potus, the idea is that relays will no longer be a thing. However, some relays think that they will stay and pay better. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, if I can just quickly say where this is from. Titan Builder has a blog where they're saying they think the P2P bids will be constrained. Proposers will connect, and GetHeader will have the better bids. And so a lot of it will be private auction rather than public.
Yes, so this is part of ePBS. I also expect no single bid over P2P will be the winning bid. That's not an issue. The issue is whoever signs the payload. Today, the payload is signed by someone that has not built that payload. And under ePBS, if we are still in protocol, the payload would be signed by whomever delivers that payload. It could be a relay, it could be the builder themselves. But I'm hoping that it's not going to be the proposer. It's going to be someone that is actually responsible for building that payload. Now, there is a philosophical question of whether or not ePBS removes relays or not.
Recording stopped.
I think the recording has stopped, but anyways. But the point here is that ePBS makes it so that builders become relayers. So it makes the equality of builders and relayers. It removes the intermediary option for a relay. So still validators would still connect directly to someone that today is called relay, later is going to be called builder. But whomever we connect directly, the API will be essentially the same. If you want, I can discuss over what are the auction mechanisms that we actually are expected to change. And I agree completely with all of the assessments of the Titan team. That's exactly my reading as well. But that's a very bad misconception in thinking that that ePBS is about like having this P2P network where bids are going to be propagated. Those bids are just there for safety reasons, so that if the few builders that are centralized are dead for whatever reason, for a bug or whatever it is, we can still save the network and keep liveness by having any validator be able to produce those bids. Although in the latest iteration, it's not going to be any validator that was going to be able to propagate bits. It's only going to be validators that have builder withdrawal credentials.
That's great clarification. Thank you.
I can keep hopping to other questions. We could ask this one, another ePBS question from the YouTube chat, which is that, do you think that new constraints on builders will affect execution APY for stakers? Who wants to take that one?
I can take all of them. No,
Okay.
I'm gonna have strong opinions on all of them. So then someone else can give the counterpart.
Great.
One of the biggest changes on how this goes, and we will not know until we know what the builder market is. Let me make an assumption, which might not be a safe assumption, but I think it is, which is we're not going to see a collusion among all possible builders. And I can explain why I believe that this is going to happen, that we are not going to see a collusion among all possible builders into trying to keep this off protocol. As long as there is no such a collusion, then the auction changes from being public and unsealed. We can see now today the bids from everyone, and naturally is going to go to a sealed first price auction. So today it's a mixture. It's a first price auction, but it's not sealed, and some people call it a second price auction, but it's a different story. Like relays inside can do whatever they want on their auction. But after ePBS, this auction should go into a sealed price auction because the proposer himself can send signed request, encrypted request directly to the builder, and the builder can reply knowing that he's only sending the bid to the proposer and no one else. The proposer, of course, can make it public if they want to, but in principle, this auction happens without other builders seeing what other builders are bidding. So this naturally should make it so that in this kind of auction, you'd expect the bidding mechanism to be different than if you had, for example, a second price auction. Now, as to the APY, well, there's a bunch of things that might affect that. The major one is private order flow, as you mentioned. That's correct. We are already in a world in which the builders that are winning the bids are the ones that hold that private order flow anyways. So that I expect is not going to change at all. I expect the winning builders would be the same winning builders that they win today. Nothing seems to be changing in that regard.
Okay. Remy, is this other question a different question, or is it related to that one?
I believe it was related to the question, yeah.
Okay. So there's something here about in the forecast. So like I mentioned before, this forecast resource is great for understanding these EIPs, but something that it mentioned there was that in ePBS, the staking UX is improved. Can you speak to that? Maybe is this maybe a good question for Terrence about like what this looks like from a staker UX perspective and about like picking and monitoring? Like I was trying to understand that better. And
yeah, sure. So happy to take that one. So today, as you know, if you run a validated client, you have the option to outsource your block to the builder. And by doing so, you typically use this middleware that's called MBB Boost. So you essentially, in the MBB Boost, you will configure a list of relayer you want to get bits from. And then this kind of is like this, you basically choose the highest bid. And then you have this one out of an assumption that as long as one relayer is good, then you will get a bid from them. And then you check that against your local bid, which one's higher, then you will, and then you basically will decide, right? So as Botus mentioned, and if you read the forecast, that if we lose these relayers in the middle, that just means that the validators will work with the builders directly. And what it means is that, like, you can just imagine the builders just becoming their own relayer. So you have this direct RPC connections to the builder. And then from the US perspective, I don't think much will change. I think what we'll end up doing, the clients will essentially just absorb the MVV boost functionality for the get header API, basically. And then, so you essentially will code the get headers to the builders directly, and then you will essentially have the similar, it's basically very, very similar flag. And then you can think of, instead of the relay endpoint, it's basically the builder's endpoint. And then you still have the same assumption that you would get the highest bid from the builder, and then you will essentially sign that, and then you will essentially broadcast that. So it's basically the same thing, right? Like and then instead of returning the payload today to the relayer, you just essentially broadcast that block with the header onto the network, and you're done. And that's basically it. So I don't expect much changes. I think there are very interesting questions on like, how do we trustlessly get this curated list of builders to get bids from over the internet, whether it's through like a small contract registry platform or some trusted third-party resources. But I think that's another very interesting question. Yeah.
So
can I ask one right quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So right now, a lot of home stakers have a bit of bandwidth anxiety. They can get between 15 and 30 megabits per second up, and that's the max they're getting, right? Does ePBS improve the kind of spiky upload requirements during block production at all?
Right. So like Fotis mentioned earlier, right? Like if you really think about it, because of this pipelining feature, I'm calling it a feature right here, but maybe that's the wrong word, that essentially you're moving this hot path outside of the attestation deadline. So you can think of today the attestation deadline is 4 seconds, and you have 2 seconds to broadcast. And then in the ePBS, depends on when you set the data availability deadline, you probably will have 3 to 4 times more than that, right? And then by definition, you could essentially broadcast 3 to 4 times more, blobs in a way. But then the question is that what is the amount of blobs that this is more philosophical, political. We need more testing. Like what is the amount of blobs that we want to support? I suppose this also depends on the BPO schedule as well. And yeah, so the short answer is definitely yes. But then the longer, more nuanced answer is just like what is the number of blobs, and what is the deadline, which basically we need more testing about. And do you mean self-building as well, or?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, right? I see some messages here from POTUS in the chat. Unfortunately, I'm mobile as well, so can't read them. Yes, I think this only applies to self-building, right? If I'm going through a builder, then they have the upload requirement, and is that accurate?
Thorsten, I think we lost the last couple things the last 5 seconds of what you
my
said.
Apologies. That's up to me. That's because of that. That's my fault.
Okay.
So I saw POTUS messages here. My understanding is yes, this entire upload bandwidth question is for people who self-build, and some people really want to continue doing that. And if I am using a builder, then none of that applies. I don't need to upload blobs very quickly because the builder has to do all that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And Terence's answer is also correct. Although, I mean, ePBS allows the client to be smart enough that when you're self-building, you're going to be utilizing your bandwidth the best possible way. Implementations are very far away from even thinking about this. But already just the fact that if you do the naive thing of broadcasting everything right with your consensus block as we do today, that would be the most naive thing of doing. And that would be probably not, certainly not the optimal, because on ePBS, what you want to get out as quickly as possible, it's only the consensus part of the block, because everything else can take the entire slot. But the consensus part of the block actually is going to get worse for self-builders, because instead of having up to 4 seconds to propagate, we're thinking 2 seconds or 3 seconds. So even if you do the naive thing of sending everything together, your blobs and your execution payload would have much more time to reach the target audience, which is the PTC commitment, the PTC committee, and the next proposal.
Thank you. Perfect.
I'm going to bring this practical question I asked in our chat here about MEV boost, because it sounds like this changes how any stakers that are running that, which I know a large part of the network is, like how we treat that type of sidecar software and what the future is of even having that. Are you all able to kind of give comments on if this is even relevant anymore in this ePBS world? And also curious if FOCIL would even impact it at all, or if there's any, if we can talk to that a little bit, because I know that's something people run. POTUS, do you want to take that one? Or Terrence, either, yeah.
Sure, it's MEV boost is no longer necessary. It's a feature that will be included by the spec within clients. And that's something that you asked before, and I'm going to get back to your question eventually later about the UX of staking on ePBS. This is one of those things. We do no longer need to be looking into software that is not maintained by core developers. MEV Boost is a community effort now, and it's a public good. It's maintained by Flashbots, but it is the fact that it's not maintained by clients directly makes it less tested, and it makes some friction on the testing on PandaOps and so forth. So MEV Boost itself is no longer going to be needed, and the features that MEV Boost provides today will be provided by clients directly, by the CL clients, because the clients will need to contact directly builders. However, there are other sidecars, Commit Boost, for example. So there are other sidecars that validators are running today to have other off-protocol auctions to provide other services besides just pure block building. Pre-confirmations is one, and so forth. And these things are taking off. And as long as those sidecars are compatible with ePBS, and it seems that they are, validators would, for example, Commit Boost is the one that I know the most, has a module that is for MEV Boost itself, and another module which is for pre-confirmations. So that module that is running the part of MEV Boost is no longer going to be necessary, and it's going to be superseded by consensus clients themselves. But you could still attach a sidecar to sell pre-confirmations or whatever it is, to talk to a gateway and whatever it is, as long as those mechanisms are compatible with the in-protocol ePBS auction.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Do you want to take a couple FOCIL questions?
Yes. Let's first, I know you had a couple here, and I'm just looking. One of the things I guess I had was about like this idea that there's protocol rules now for these inclusion lists, and just trying to understand like operationally what that means for. It's coming from the mempool. I understand that. It's defined by how, like, is this primarily a CL client change that would just be baked into what we're running on the node, or is it does it change anything about how, like, the duties that a validator would have to be like abiding by these inclusion lists? Jihoon, does that question make sense? And I think there's a couple other questions too about FOCIL that we can dive into.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that question. Actually, before we decide the headliners for Glamsterdam, I've prepared some articles about FOCIL implementation. Let me pull up the link and share in the chat up just a bit later. I wanted to provide some solid material for developers to help examine the feasibility of FOCIL on top of ePBS. So I named them as, the complexity of FOCIL for the CL and the EL, but interestingly, I found some people from the community took the titles and cited as FOCIL is complex to implement. But title matters, but actually what I intended was the opposite. The complexity of FOCIL is quite small compared to that of ePBS. So how it changes the protocol is we constrain next swap builders to include certain set of transactions. That's the gist of it. And how to implement it is we need to change mostly CL client and a bit of EL client. So the duty of EL client is to provide inclusion list if you are an inclusion list committee member, and if you are a tester, then you need to validate if a payload satisfies the inclusion list constraint, and that's the request from CL to the EL. For the CL, you need to take a look into the your committee assignment to see if you have inclusion list committee assignment duty. And if you have that duty, you need to construct inclusion list and broadcast in timely manner. And of course, you as a validator, you need to participate broadcasting inclusion lists. And I guess that's pretty much it.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask this question
I
here
ask
about.
a follow-up
Go ahead,
question,
Thorsten.
if I could. So some proposals right now are feeling nervous about compliance with local regulations, and they're saying, I'm going to go with filtering relays. Is it fair to say that once FOCIL is in, such a thing as a filtering builder doesn't really exist anymore because we have fork choice inclusion list, so some transactions will always have to make it in, otherwise the block gets reorged out?
So in a nutshell, the answer is yes, but we have a conditional inclusion property. So what I mean by that is just because a transaction is included, is specified in some inclusion list, it doesn't mean that you have to include it in a block. You are allowed to omit an inclusion list transaction if they are invalid or when a block is full, and we don't impose any ordering rule, so you can order transactions however you want. And when the chain is congested, then you can prefer to include your favorite transactions, such as high value transaction over inclusion list transactions. So
That's interesting. Thank you.
Yes. And on top of that, we are also doing some research on using cryptography to hide, like in the same vein, you as an inclusion list committee member, you might prefer to not touch some transactions sent by certain addresses. Then we can use cryptography, we call it ring signature, to disconnect the inclusion list committee member and what kind of inclusion list they suggested. And yeah, so we call it ZK FOCIL, but it's still in research, but we have the prototype is still in their progress. And yeah, I hope it answers your question.
It does. Just one more follow-up, if I may. ZK FOCIL is not what's proposed for Glamsterdam, right? That's future, maybe improvement upon FOCIL if FOCIL makes it into Glamsterdam.
No, it's not part of the proposal for Glamsterdam. So we have three major research topics when it comes to FOCIL. One is ZK FOCIL. Second is incentive mechanism. And third one is supporting blob transaction. We don't support blob transaction because it might have some attack factor, such as an inclusion list committee member can include a blob transaction without propagating necessary data. This is more related to blob transaction and the blob mempool stuff. So we wanted to keep FOCIL, EIP 7805 as simple as possible. So the ZK FOCIL stuff is not part of the proposal for Glamsterdam.
Perfect. So more to come, in future hard forks, possibly, maybe, depending on where R&D goes. I'm done with questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe a practical question here I had around this comment that validator behavior tracking systems are going to need major updates after FOCIL. What does that mean in practice for people? Is this talking about like beacon chain type block explorers, things that we use for monitoring? Like what is it that FOCIL is like architecting differently that needs changes on that?
So in order to learn if you have inclusion list committee duty, it's quite simple and straightforward because we just take 16 beacon committee members at the front of the list. So it's quite super straightforward. And for Block Explorer, I think we want to see what kinds of inclusion list were proposed for that certain slot. So we might want to provide some new page that shows what kind of inclusion list transactions were proposed and if each of them are included or not. Yeah, I think this is major changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then maybe so on that same theme, but actually for ePBS, this idea of monitoring and changes needed for it. I had a similar question about that because there's a comment that that ePBS is going to require certain updates for monitoring staking pools, and was wondering what that meant. And
yeah, that's the staking pools are the major affected players on ePBS, and they have been actually the most helpful community members in shaping what ePBS does. I am essentially in contact almost every day now with people from Lido because these are the only ones that are actually reading the spec besides the core devs that are writing it and actually finding edge cases that are interesting. And it's as any time that you touch a moving blockchain, if you're touching anything on the EVM, it's going to represent a lot of money that these companies are spending into changing contracts that are already live. Lido in particular is very much affected because they shipped in a decentralized manner before they could. I mean, when they had the system wasn't really prepared to have, for example, withdrawals triggered by the execution layer. So that meant that once we shipped Electra, they incurred in like very large costs to change their contracts to be compatible with Electra. And the same thing happens with ePBS. The way that the builder is paying today for a block is by sending a transaction or by setting Coinbase to the fee recipient that the proposer specifies. With ePBS, the proposer will still specify in the exact same manner as today what the fee recipient is, that where he wants the payment to go through, but that payment is not going to go on a transaction on the payload. It's going to come on a withdrawal that would be posted on the consensus layer, and that withdrawal would be debited from the builder's account and credited to that fee recipient address whenever the churn of the withdrawal exit happens. So this means that systems that are built to trustlessly be monitoring this on the EVM need to change. And the original ePBS version was actually much simpler. And if we didn't have these pools already in place, I think we would have shipped the much simpler version that would just simply deduct balance from the builder and credit the validator balance on the proposer. And that's viable. It's much simpler than going through a withdrawal process to credit the validators. But the withdrawal process made it so that the changes were, while still expensive for the staking pools, they're much less invasive on their contracts. They're going to be cheaper to like audit and the such. I don't know if that answers your question, but this is what people monitoring mean. I mean, you're monitoring withdrawals and you want to check now. For example, one of the questions I was asked this week was, we want to check whether a withdrawal comes from an actual withdrawal from the proposer or an exit from the proposer, or now a payment from a builder. And now you need to distinguish these three scenarios, and you have to do this on contracts on chain.
Great. Yeah, that does answer it very well. Thank you. Okay. There's a number of resource links that we have that I've mentioned, and we'll include those in this call recording in the YouTube on the EthStaker YouTube. There's also some other things that Jihoon and POTUS and Terrence have been sharing also, so we'll collect all of those and share for people also. Yeah, I think we've reached the end of our Q&A. I don't know if there's anything else on YouTube that any last minute questions, but I think we're pretty we've gone through all the ones that we had planned. So thank you three for joining. I mean, really interesting discussion, learning about this, and I hope this is useful for stakers. Trying to get your head around all the different changes coming to the protocol and a number of them impacting what you do. So this is really helpful and valuable, I think, to the community. Before we go, I mean, I guess I would just also do a quick plug for later this year in November. We're doing a event. EthStaker is putting on something called Staking Gathering. And if you liked this discussion, there will be plenty more things discussed like this at the event. So be on the lookout soon. We'll be announcing tickets for joining us there. And that's in November in Buenos Aires. So that'll be exciting. And then before we also leave, I wanted to make sure we give out the POAP. We can share the details here on the screen for anyone attending.
It's on
Remy,
screen.
we got it up.
Yep.
All right. So that's the info. If you've attended these before, you know the drill. But you send 0.001 ETH to the POAP.ethstaker.eth address, and it's minted on Arbitrum, and they're supporting us there, powering this POAP mint. So go collect that, and thanks for coming and learning. And if you have any ideas for other ones, we always like to hear those through the Discord or reach out to us directly, to the EthStaker crew here. Great. Thanks, POTUS, Terrence, and Jihoon. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for coming and taking the time here with the community.
Having us.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.